Today, I want us to look at the strategic implementation process and evaluation, and then we shall be through with the theoretical part of strategy, the practical part of strategy. So, in one of my earlier statements, I said the biggest challenge facing procurement in a profession today is strategic implementation. We are very good at developing strategies as organizations, but also we're very good at shelving them for them to accumulate dust. And that is something that we need to improve on, work on. But whatever we set in motion, we are able to implement it. And what do we mean by implementation? It's about having the objectives set out to be achieved using the organization structure, using the systems that are in place, using the structures, resources. We looked at the different levels of strategy: business level, corporate level, business level, and the functional level. All these play a big role in the implementation of strategies. These are the systems that we're supposed to use. But are we doing that? Why do we stop at formulation and then implementation becomes a challenge to us? When we talk about implementation, we're looking at several steps. We have already developed a strategy like we did earlier on. Okay? But implementation cannot be possible without resources. And that's what we mean by resourcing a strategy. Financial resources, human resources, infrastructure resources, these are very important in implementing a strategy. This morning, I saw some clips trending of the Ministry of Health getting her jab for the COVID vaccine. Now, one of the strategies for government on managing COVID-19 is to immunize people. And today they have taken off. They have launched the immunization process. That is implementation of a strategy. But to implement such a strategy, resources were needed to buy the virus, to transport it to Uganda, to have that launch at Kololo. Those are resources. For any strategy, you need resources to implement it. But also you need a policy that guides the strategy, that directs on how to implement the strategy. It gives direction. This policy must be worked out from the supply chain department, from the procurement department, with the blessing of other departments. Let's have the best policies to push our strategies. Also, when it comes to implementation of strategies, how do we reward people who play a big role in having these strategies take off? Do we reward them? Do we recognize them with certificates? Best performer, I think you have seen those accolades: best performer, best supply chain professional, best green environmental something. Reward is very important. At times, reward doesn't have to just be monetary. We make a mistake and I think that reward has got to be related to monetary reward. There are so many ways to reward someone. You can take someone for training, you develop him, you recognize him, give him a certificate. That is very important. But also with strategy, it is leadership with implementation. You need a right leader. It's not more of administrative, it's more of leadership to point you to a certain direction, to lead you, to guide you like a shepherd guides his flock. Now, why are we finding challenges with implementing strategies? It's because the people in organizations fear implementation. Because implementation is the actual doing. Several things change within the organization. Because once implementation starts, that means things are not going to be the same again. There has got to be a change of the way things were being done. And people fear this change. New relationships come up, power groups come up, informal groups come up, and they threaten the old status quo, which may still want to be in existence. And yet, right now, the environment calls for us to change. This is the threat of implementation. What we also need to know is that there are differences between formulation of strategies and implementation of strategies. The formulation stage on our left is about planning, making decisions. The implementation stage is about the actual doing, executing, walking the talk. Formulation, we are talking. Implementation, we are walking. In formulation, the forces are before action. In implementation, it is during the action. That is why we say implementation is the actual doing. Formulation, you do a lot of thinking, you are entrepreneurial, you're trying to make decisions. Implementation is more of administrative. Administrative, where we have people like the reps here doing the administrative work, tasks being given, operational. Implementation is about getting your hands dirty, not sitting in an office making decisions. It's about getting your hands dirty. And that's why we differentiate between formulation and implementation, as formulation is effectiveness, implementation is about efficiency. Efficiency sees results coming. We say that formulation stage involves rational planning, emergent model, and maybe logical incrementalism. But implementation is the operational process. Next semester, we're going to do operations management. We're looking at input, transformation, output. That means during implementation, there has got to be a transformation process taking place from the old to the new. Now, you will observe that at the formulation stage, the stakeholders are many, yes, but very few are involved in making the strategy. And yet in the implementation stage, all the levels of strategy are involved. The operational, the functional, the business units, the top leadership, all of them are involved. The formulation stage is about logical thinking, skills, and all that. Implementation, you're looking at the motivational part of it. How do I motivate Rachel and Haman to do this, to take on e-learning, to come online, to invest in data? How do I motivate them? It's a very challenging stage. And we're looking at very many strategies depending on the organization. If it is e-procurement, how do you motivate people to start employing e-procurement? If it's sustainability, how do you motivate them to embrace sustainability? If it is supplier development, how do you get them to accept supplier development? So, very, very important for us to think about implementation. And what I want us to think about here is which is the effective way of doing things? Which is the efficient way of doing things? How do we use our resources to do the right things? How do we use our resources to pursue the right goals in strategies? That should be food for thought. Now, We have formulated a strategy. We have implemented it. Whether we have formulated an e-procurement strategy, maybe a risk management strategy, maybe a supply chain optimization strategy, or a supplier development strategy, we have got the ground forces to do the implementation. We're now developing suppliers, we're investing in them, we're training, we are already looking at the promised land because the objectives we set out, we see ourselves soon achieving them. But how do we know that we are heading towards the promised land? How do we know that we're heading towards the right direction? That the implementation plan is going according to the book. This can only happen if we have evaluation and control measures in our organization. That is evaluating the formulation stage and also the post-implementation stage. At the formulation stage, which strategy did you opt for? Is it the right strategy anyway? Will it give you competitiveness or not? One of the reasons why we have the emergent approach in strategic formulation is because during the rational planning stage, we opt for the wrong strategy. That's why emergent strategies come out, because we opted for the wrong strategy. At post-implementation, we also need to know that the strategy we opted for, was it successful? Did we reach the promised land? I've always questioned this, and I think I've mentioned it to you. When the Israelites left Egypt, going to the promised land, between Egypt, after crossing the Red Sea, and the promised land, is a 1 month journey. If you're to walk, any of us here was to walk in the desert. But why did these people take 4 years, 40 years, on a journey of 30 days? I'm not questioning God's will, but I'm just giving an example of why it is important to go back and evaluate some of these things. Okay? So, at the formulation stage, you're formulating this strategy. Is it consistent? There are some principles that a strategy must fulfill. Consistent across all the organization structures, whereby there is no conflict, whereby everyone agrees on it. The objectives are clearly spelled. It's about cutting costs. Let it be about cutting costs. It's about improving efficiency. Let it be about improving efficiency. Don't tell me you're cutting costs and yet you find at the end of the day there's a very huge budget for the implementation. Where is the consistency? We thought we were developing our suppliers to try and manage some of these costs in the supply chain. And yet, deep down, at the end of the day, you're looking at a very huge budget. So where is the consistency with cost cutting? It must be able to respond to the environment, what we refer to as consonance. It should be addressing the environmental issues. That is what we refer to as strategic fit, fitting within the environment that you are operating in. Look at the e-learning. What environment were we looking at? no education, learners are at home, online learning came up to fit in that exact environment, to serve that environment. Does it give you advantage over your competition? Will it propel you? These are things you need to ask yourself. If you're opting for a strategy which is not going to propel you, then what's the point in investing funds in going for such a strategy? Is it feasible financially? Is it feasible financially to you? The Nigerians have a saying that a man who swallows a knife must be very careful, because what you have swallowed has got to come out. If you're opting for this strategy, be careful what you're swallowing. It may choke you, it may cut you. That's what we need to ask ourselves. This strategy we're opting for, won't it overstrain us financially or capacity-wise? Wanting a mansion, how are you going to maintain a huge mansion? I would want to drive a car like the president drives, yeah. Can I afford to spend 300,000 shillings per day on fuel? Won't I sell my house, my whole family, in the name of moving in such a car? So, what we are saying is that strategy should address the environment within which we are operating by meeting the requirements of the given environmental situation. It should propel you over your competitors, giving you an advantage and improve your company performance. If you sit down and evaluate and think that at the formulation stage, and you don't see how the strategy is going to deliver all these, the probability that you're choosing the wrong strategy is very, very high. What about at post-implementation stage? Were the objectives fulfilled? Did you reach the promised land? Was the mission fulfilled? So that next time we do not make the same mistakes. The reason why history repeats itself is because we don't learn from history. We need to understand the processes, the results of this strategy. How did it help us? And again here, when we're evaluating, we need to look at internal consistency with the organization. Were the strategies achievable? Are they addressing our corporate objective, in our vision, in our mission? You remember when we talked about mission and vision? What do we want to be? How do we want to see ourselves? If we want to see ourselves as proponents of green procurement, of sustainable procurement, of environmental management, is that being addressed? Do they reinforce each other? For example, if you're pushing for a strategy on sustainability, that means you should also have a strategy on e-procurement, because e-procurement drives sustainability. They all reinforce each other. If you're pushing for sustainability, you need to also have a strategy on supplier relationships and management, because there's no you can have sustainability without relationships. These strategies work together, they reinforce each other. It is kind of synergy. Do we know the crucial procurement issues in our organizations or supply chain issues? Are they being addressed? Environmental fit. We talked about the SWOT analysis in the video I shared with you. The strategy you have opted for, how does it use your strengths? In that strategy, how do you use your strengths to gain competitiveness? How does that strategy exploit the opportunities? How do those strengths help you fight the threats and the weaknesses? How do those opportunities help you overcome the weaknesses in your organization? If you look at that, then it means the strategy is fitting within your environment. When we talk about the SWOT analysis, it's very, very important because the strengths that you have in your organizations are supposed to help you overcome the threats. The opportunities you see out there in the environment are supposed to help you overcome the weaknesses in your organization. Resources, we have just been talking about resourcing strategy. You cannot have strategies implemented without resources. You cannot. You have seen the other day I watched in the newspaper, the article was advising young men and ladies of their days. They want to get married, they have very huge budgets, millions and millions, and you ask them, how much do you have? Nothing. They are calling wedding meetings. They have now been rephrased and called begging meetings. Why are you going on a begging spree? Because you want? So there must be a resource fit. And stakeholder inclusion is very important, and that's why we emphasize communication. Communication and sensitization of all the different stakeholders in your organizations. Remember we talked about the environment within which we operate. That environment has so many external and internal stakeholders. You need to bring those stakeholders on board so that you can gain their commitment, for them to be part of you, to buy into your ideas. So you need to look at, how did you communicate? How did you implement this communication? How did you sensitize? I've just talked about the immunization of the COVID-19. Right now, there are so many, everyone is writing about the vaccine. Uganda has about 1 million vaccine. They have kickstarted the implementation stage of vaccination. But how are they, the Minister of Health, going to ensure that people get the right message regarding the vaccine? Because there's a lot of fake news also going around about the vaccine, which may make some people fear getting immunized, which means communication at this stage is very, very important. And you will agree with me about the strength of communication. If we look at the beginning of the coronavirus journey in Uganda last year, when we had the lockdown, and there was a lot of communication and sensitization, and you will observe that it was during the implementation stage of stay at home, wear a mask, wash your hands, do what? Every radio station was talking about COVID-19, wearing a mask, washing your hands, sanitization. And people took it seriously. And that is the power of communication in bringing on board stakeholders when you're making strategies, when you're implementing strategies. This has to be understood. This morning, I had a challenge. I was having a class with some students. And some students on the group were insisting, no, actually, we want physical. And I was very clear to them. I told them, go and look at what your timetable says. Your timetable clearly spells out how these lectures are going to take place. This one is physical, this one is virtual. This one is, what does that tell you? One of the stakeholders who is supposed to play a role in implementation, who is a student maybe, didn't understand the communication. And that's when we get challenges in implementation of strategies. But at the end of the day, this whole process is about helping us to make the right decisions. These decisions concern our operating atmosphere, our environment. Are we making the right decisions? And you see, at the end of the day, I am going to maybe give you a question, maybe a case study, and I'll give you a challenge. And I'll ask you to come up with a solution, whereby you all have to make a decision regarding your supply chain. But as business practitioners, you will find that we are all going to come up with different strategic decisions. The point is that we need to justify the decisions we came up with, why we opted for A instead of B. I remember Uganda Airlines, when they made the purchase of the Airbus 360 buses, there was a lot again of news going in the social media. They should have bought Boeing, not Airbus and all that. And management came out clearly of Ministry of Works and said there's a reason why we opted for Airbus and not Boeing. I hope you know that Airbus is made in a European airline and Boeing is an American airline. Airbus uses Rolls-Royce engines, Boeing uses, I think, forgotten what they use. Okay? They are two different. But they came up with a reason, a strategic reason why they opted for the decision to purchase Airbuses. When the NRM government had just taken power, it bought ministers, I think, sedan cars, some small cars, and some funny cars. I think they were called. We were still young then. Santanas, they were very young kids, and it was because reason. No. We cannot afford to have luxury things. We don't have that money and all that. Making a decision and defending your decision. That's what strategic management is all about. Now, the decisions we make, how are they going to affect our organizational resources? How? Will you wake up today and say you're going to, I would want to wake up today and I say I am installing solar in my home where I stay right now. A solar system would cost me about maybe 4 million shillings. Yes. In the long run, sustainability wise, I'll cut costs instead of paying 150,000 per month on umeme yaka. But right now, if I spent 4 million on yaka today, I mean on solar today, how does it affect the other activities in the home? Now let's move away from home. Let's imagine it's a company. You're spending 4 million shillings on a certain decision you have made today. Will you be able to pay salaries tomorrow? Will you be able to pay the fixed and variable costs of the organization? How will it impact on that? It may mean that now you have to go and mobilize other resources. Then, If you want to expand your market, go into new territories. You want to go into global supply chains. Would that mean you're acquiring new facilities, maybe in the European Union or in the Far East? Do you have the resources? Are you going to go and borrow from the bank? Or are you going to go into IPO, selling shares? So you need to ask yourself, the decisions you make, are they going to be a threat to you? Will they weaken you? Or will they open for you better opportunities? At the end of the day, the decision is yours. What do you want to see in your organization? How do you want to see it? One thing for sure is that there is no strategic decision that is made without having change. That means if we are going to manage, implement strategies, we need to plan for change management, which is going to be one of our topics later on. How do we manage change? How do we bring those people on board who don't want to change? Let's look at our e-learning, the threats it faced. There's some people who even went all the way to Parliament, petitioning the Speaker of Parliament, not wanting to see change. But tell me now, which university are you going to go to in Uganda or in this whole world now, which is not using blended learning? Which one? For your information, do you know that heart operations are carried out at the Uganda Heart Institute using computers, whereby a doctor is in maybe India or Uganda or America, watching the operation and directing doctors on what area to cut? It's happening today. If it is happening in theater, where human lives are involved, what about in other spheres of life? Strategic decisions are also complex because they are long-term and they may not bring good results to people. That's why people fear implementation. We say implementation leads to changes, and people fear that change. And they tend to take a top-down approach. They come from the top, come down to the different levels, business strategy, functional and operational levels. And let's never confuse them with operational and administrative decisions. We talked about these earlier on, which takes us to the difference. This table is very clear about the differences in strategic decisions, administrative decisions, and operational decisions. From our definition of strategy, we said strategy is long-term. Remember, long-term plan. That's why we talked about strategy as a perspective. Where do you see yourself in the future? Administrative are daily, and operational are maybe weekly or monthly. The long-term part of it comes again here because we're talking about the future in strategic decisions. And yet administrative are short-term and operational are medium-term. Strategic decisions are derived from the mission and vision. You cannot develop a strategic decision when you don't know the vision of your organization and mission. And yet, operational decisions and administrative decisions stem from strategic decisions. They stem from the strategic decisions. Any operation decision, any administrative decision has got to be in line with the strategic direction of an organization. Strategic decisions, you're looking at planning for the whole organization. If it is Uganda Christian University, you're planning for the whole of Uganda Christian University. Yet administrative may be looking at BPLM, BBA, or Faculty of Business only. Even operational may be related to maybe even just a discussion group. Strategic decisions look at growth because any company wants to grow and become a market leader and become competitive. Whereas administrative, you're looking at welfare of employees working. Operation, you're looking at production, dealing with MROs, inputs vis-a-vis outputs, day to day. So, this brings us to the end of that theoretical long part of strategy, which I insisted that it's very important that we grasp it, because if we fail to grasp it, it is the foundation of this whole paper. Because from today onwards, we're going to be talking about strategies and all that. We're going to go into the actual strategies. But it's useless talking about a strategy when you do not know how that strategy comes about, when you do not know that it has to be implemented. You don't know how it was formulated. You don't know how to evaluate it. You do not know that it was a long-term decision. Thank you. Can we have some questions?